Hi everyone, this is Grandmaster Eugene Perelshteyn with chess.com, and I am showing you part 3 of the series of Scandinavian defense. So Scandinavian after e4, d5, e takes d, queen takes d5. And in part 1, in part 2, I focused on the move knight c3, queen a5, d4, where white plays various ways to try to develop his pieces, to harass the queen on a5 or not, but either way, black has a few good antidotes. Now, in part 3, there are other ways to meet this move queen a5. In particular, white doesn't have to play d4 at all. White doesn't have to play bishop to c4 at all. White can fianchetto the bishop on g2. And all of these moves have to be looked at. So let's start with the move bishop c4. So the idea is very straightforward. White is keeping his options open, whether to play d4 or d3. At the same time, he's already eyeing the pawn on f7, and black has to be careful in order to not get in trouble here. So I prefer a very simple move knight f6. This is almost universal move, pretty much what white throws at you. And now white plays the move d3. Again, after d4, most likely we're going to transpose with the move c6, knight f3 into one of the main lines, and bishop f5, which I covered in part 1 and part 2. But d3 sort of stands on its own and has some ideas behind it. So c6, bishop d2. Immediately, white is asking black a question. Are you going to be ready for the knight jumps? In order not to even worry about any of these moves, I like to put my queen where she is very safe. And once again, black is waiting for white to make his next move. Usually white, there's really no point for white to play knight f3 as it allows bishop g4 and e6 setup. White queen e2 is more tricky because bishop g4 is met by f3, and really there is no point to go to g4. Why, might ask? What's the point to go to g4 if the knight is not on f3? But this is very, very sort of unorthodox way to play for white. You neglect the development of your knight, you play d3, bishop d2, queen e2. Is that a real way to fight for advantage? No. And therefore, black seizes the opportunity immediately and plays b5, hitting the bishop, bishop b3, a5. If white is not careful, with a4, he's going to get his bishop trapped. So white usually plays a4 himself, b4. Now black is really gaining a lot of space on the queen side. And after knight e4, after this simple knight trade, black is going to have himself a very good position. If pawn takes, it only invites bishop a6. Later on we can play e6 and not worry about f7 being in trouble. So queen usually takes, and now e6. So this is a little bit different. The bishop is not going to get developed to g4 or f5 at all, but instead we have ourselves this whole queenside expansion where the bishop will feel comfortable in b7 or a6, depending on what white does. If knight f3, knight d7. Now white has to worry about all sorts of knight c5 ideas. Queen h4. Well, you're only inviting bishop e7 and queen g3 going into the endgame. And let us think who is better in this endgame. White does have the open h file, but that's probably all he has. All the other trumps are in black's favor. In particular, the queenside expansion and putting the bishop on the h8, a1 diagonal really favors black. b2 is a real target. Castling long might run into some potential bishop a6, c5, c4 plan, or knight b6, and really going after the king. And after d4, very powerful move c5, undermining this whole center, and the pawn on b2 is going to be hanging In general, another idea is to put the bishop on b7 or a6 with c4. Black just has way too many plans, and white pretty much has lost all of his opening advantage, if he had any, and I think black is slightly better at this point. So this is what happens if white plays early bishop c4 and d3. So besides bishop c4, the popular other way to develop the bishop is g3. Because remember, a lot of times when black plays e6, the bishop on c4 does absolutely nothing. You know, it's being blocked by the pawn's f7, e6, and doesn't really participate in the game. g3 is a way to fianchetto the bishop, to once again try to utilize the queen on a5. You're going to see later with ideas of b4, and try to take advantage of this whole setup for black. So let's see what black does next. After g3, once again, knight f6 is pretty universal. Bishop g2, and now c6. I should also mention that there is more than one way to counter this system. Besides c6, black can try to go for g6 and fianchetto his bishop. He says, if white can do it, why can't I? While keeping the bishop on c8, protecting the pawn on b7. Another way is kind of to go for e5 and knight c6 type of structure, which is fine too. It's just not in the spirit of the opening. In the spirit of the opening, you want to play c6, get your bishop out, play e6, and have a very nice pawn structure. So let's look at c6. Knight g2. Notice that keeping the bishop open, it's important for white, as you're going to see later, to utilize that bishop. Now bishop f5. There is no point to go to g4, as you're only going to get hit with h3. And now b4. This is the whole point behind white's setup. Now if queen takes b4, black is only going to run into trouble after rook b1, and now b7 pawn is weak. And then you really see the power of the bishop on g2. So after b4, it's very important for black not to take that pawn and simply drop back. White castles, and now e6. So white really has to follow up with his plan, rook b1, but black is super solid. After bishop e7, white can play d3 or b5 right away. Pretty much it doesn't matter. Let's say white plays b5 and we castle. It turns out that even though white has the rook lined up, the bishop lined up, it's really hard for him to do any damage. The queen and the knight on b8 and the pawn on b7 do a good job of protecting the whole queen side. And black is super solid once again. Now, what could happen here? Well, if white plays moves such as h3, black now can play knight d5. And if we trade, of course, you can take with the pawn and have super solid knight on d4. I should also point out that now you have some tactical ideas and you can take with the knight, because if knight takes, pawn takes, bishop takes, h3 is under attack. So the knight on d5 does a good job of preventing this bishop from doing any damage. Now a more normal looking move is something like d3. Well, after d3, I kind of like this idea for black, this move a6. It looks a little bit weird to play a6 and create this hole on b6. But in reality, all you're doing is pressuring the b5 pawn to make a decision. Do you take on c6 and allowing knight takes? And now it turns out that black has a very fluid development, whereas white has actually bad pawn structure. Later on, black can play rook c8, b5, and harass white on the c file. Knight on c6 does a really good job of blocking the bishop on g2, and I don't really see any way to try to take advantage of the setup. Now b6 may be a little bit more annoying, but after b6, this bishop, that's what I like about this move a6. This bishop is now forever locked in there. And you can even try the moves such as queen d6, followed by knight bd7. And later on, the pawn on b6 will potentially be a weakness. And so with this, black solves all his opening problems and stands pretty good. And I like black's position. So let me go back and try to summarize what we've covered so far. After e4, d5, e takes d, queen takes d5. This is called the Scandinavian defense. After knight c3, I covered series on queen d6, but this time we looked at the main move queen a5. And the main line goes like this: d4, knight f6, knight f3, c6. Remember, this is an important part of black's plan. Bishop c4, bishop f5, bishop d2, e6. And now knight d5 is the most popular way to play, hitting the queen, and we get our typical pawn structure. In the pawn structure, it's important to remember that the bishop is comfortable on g6, and it's okay to get exchange for the knight. If white castles, the rook on g8 will get a very powerful half-open file, and black will have a good attack. Other moves, such as the moves queen e2, black can play knight d7, or taking the pawn if you're ready for the tactics involved. But I only covered knight d7 because I don't think there is no need to actually going through why we can take that pawn. And of course, the moves bishop b3 and c3 were covered. And now we also covered the move queen e2, followed by castle without knight d5. And again, black has a very simple, fluid development of bishop b4, knight bd7, and black is doing great. We also covered other main moves for white, such as knight e5, followed by g4, h4, and once again I showed you that the bishop is not getting trapped because of the e4 outpost for the bishop. Bishop is doing absolutely great, followed by bishop d5. So there is also knight e5 line that you play without the bishop on c4. And here is the only time when you play bishop to e6. And remember this trick: bishop c4, knight b7, bishop takes, knight takes. And after bishop retreats, knight goes to g6, and black is doing absolutely fine. So we've covered this as well. Other moves are, if white plays bishop c4, remember that we covered the line with d3, bishop d2, queen e2, and I show you a nice way to meet it with the move c6, and queen e2 is not a dangerous move, with the move b5 followed by a5, and very good queenside expansion here for black. And finally, last but not least, e4, d5, the lines where white plays g3, the Fianchetto variation. And one of the most important things to remember there is after knight f6, bishop g2, c6, is that when white plays knight g2, bishop f5, this b4 move, temporary sacrificing the pawn. It's important to not take the pawn and run into rook b1 and then rook takes b7. This is not so good. The best move is queen c7, and we have a fluid development for black. Bishop e7, b5, and now castles. And once again, remember my idea a6, to force white to determine what to do with the b5 pawn, to play b6 and close down the position, or to take on c6, allow a knight takes. And again, black is doing very good. So this concludes the three-part series on the Scandinavian defense. This is, as I mentioned, not as well-studied opening as some other openings. And if you study these series, you will have a very good grasp on the typical plans for black. You will have a good understanding of the piece structure, of the pawn structure, of where each piece should go. And you're going to be armed with a few tactical ideas as well to play against your opponent. So this opening could be played at a club level, at a tournament level. It's a good opening, and it's usually a good surprise weapon as well. So good luck, and I hope you're going to win a lot of fun games. This was Grandmaster Eugene Perelshteyn with Chess.com, covering the Scandinavian Defense, Part 3. Thank you. Bye-bye.